happens is I will post those to Facebook. There we go. Okay. Alrighty. Okay, cool. I'm ready to go. Tonight on the PowerScripting podcast, we are pleased to have with us for the first time Matt Davis from Ansible and Red Hat. Is that correct, Matt? You actually work for Red Hat?
Yes, I do. It's a fairly recent thing, and I'm still getting used to saying that myself.
So, before we get into the meat of it, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I've been doing .NET pretty much as long as it was a thing. I started before that. I was doing Java when that was a pretty early thing. I started doing that with like Java 1.1, and then started building .NET stuff on .NET 1.0 Beta 2. So I'm kind of a dyed-in-the-wool Windows guy. Spent most of my career doing Windows. Microsoft stuff's been putting food on my table for a long time, and then this startup that I was working at a couple years ago kind of did a pivot to from it was a Windows thing when I started, and I got hired as a .NET architect, and then it kind of did a pivot into a Linuxy thing. And one of the mandates that we got right up front is that this thing will have automated deployment from day one, so get busy working on that. And we're doing continuous delivery right away, so start looking at that and figure it out. And somebody handed me the Humble book, and I started going through that and looking at Chef and Puppet and kind of going, man, I don't like this. This is like the learning curve's too steep. It's just too hard to get going on this stuff. And somebody else was like, hey, have you looked at Ansible? And we started messing around with it, and I'm like, okay, this is what I was looking for. And so I got to the point where I was doing a little bit of contribution to Ansible and hacking on the product a little bit. And the startup folded not too long after that, and a friend of a friend kind of hooked us up and said, you guys, you really took to that. You should talk to these guys. I know they're hiring. And so I ended up, long story short, I ended up going to work for Ansible in their professional services group, because that's kind of what they needed at the time. And after the Red Hat acquisition, when I was not working on my professional services gig stuff, the days that I didn't have a gig scheduled, I was doing I was working on the Windows support for Ansible, because it was kind of the red-headed stepchild. Like nobody, again, dyed-in-the-wool Linux guys, they're all, none of them like Windows. They all kind of spit whenever we started on Windows every time we'd start talking about it. And so I ended up taking over a lot of the Windows stuff and doing things with that. And with the Red Hat acquisition, it's like, okay, well, they can probably afford to, pay me to actually work on the product now. So I proposed that as a possibility, moving to the core engineering team and taking over the Windows stuff full time. And they were all about that. And the guys on the core team were like, yes, please take it. So that's kind of where I started doing that full time back in February of this year. And that's kind of where we're at.
Awesome. So maybe I missed this part, but what were you doing before you worked on the core team there?
Professional services. So just going out and helping customers do, we kind of get the full range of like, help me write my first playbook, to help us, we're doing some crazy integration with a bunch of internal stuff, and, help us figure out what the best kind of interface points into Ansible are for that, to, we want to do this DevOps thing. We hear Ansible is kind of an important part of that. So help us figure out what that looks like. And so it kind of ran the gamut, but I think that was really valuable experience. I've done a little bit of professional services stuff before in the past, but never as kind of my primary gig. So doing that for a little over a year, was very valuable. I think it brings a different perspective coming back into working on the product now. It's like, I know what people in the field are facing and the problems that they have. And, I think it's really valuable experience for product engineering.
Yeah. So totally understand what you're saying, that I kind of have gone through a similar transition in my career where I was working at a at a company that was consuming tech services. Then I worked at a vendor in kind of the partner relations area, and now I'm working in the field, getting more hands-on with customers. So it gives you a different perspective. So I can totally get what you're saying there.
Yeah. Well, I've always been on the product side pretty much, but I've ended up doing, I've always ended up out in the field a little bit. It's like if I was supporting a product that, if I had built a bunch of stuff that the field guys didn't know how to do yet, they might send me out to the field to kind of figure it out or whatever. But, I've almost always been on the product side of things. So this PS thing was kind of a new deal for me. But it was enjoyable, but the travel was tough and tough on the family and I was able to do a lot of it remotely, but still, there were some months where I'd be like gone for, weeks at a time. I'd see my family for a day or two and then back out on the road. So it's
that
tough.
is definitely hard. Yeah, I can empathize with that. So let's back up and talk about what is Ansible.
Sure.
And well, I guess we'll get into the differences first, but start at the beginning.
Okay. So Ansible kind of falls into it covers a few different buckets. You could say, configuration management, general purpose automation, orchestration. Those are some of the things that it does well. The intent is that you write a document called a playbook that is built up of a bunch of different tasks, and each task describes a desired state that you would like to see, and those by default those tasks are executed in a linear fashion. So across all of the hosts that you want to manage. So, you have a basic concept. There's a few basic concepts that you kind of build on when you're working with Ansible. The first one is an inventory. So that's, at its simplest, the series of hosts, the set of hosts that you want to talk to. And the inventory can be split up into groups, and you can assign variables and settings and things to the inventory that can be consumed by your playbooks. So those things can be set at the individual host level or at the group level and things like that.
So you can target your runbooks to particular groups.
Yeah, you can say this playbook targets my web servers, and the idea is that you write the playbooks very generically. So you might one of the things that we were doing at that startup where I was working with Ansible, we were using the exact same playbooks to deploy to a developer laptop targeting Vagrant, to a staging environment in on some real hardware that was sitting in a closet somewhere in the building, and we'd use that exact same playbook to go out to deploy to AWS, to GCE, to whatever. We're using the exact same playbooks all the way through. So when a developer wanted to get this stuff up and running and deploy the latest stuff, they were using the exact same playbook and testing the exact same playbook that we were using ultimately to push this stuff into production. So very valuable thing there to be testing that deployment infrastructure. Obviously, like there are some little parts of it that might be different. When I'm deploying everything to a developer workstation, I am maybe targeting one or two Vagrant instances of VMs, where a production deployment of this thing might target 50 servers. But written correctly, you can do that with the same exact Ansible playbooks.
So you're doing that.
The inventory is kind of your abstraction point for all of that stuff.
So you're using the variables that you're pulling in from your inventory to say, okay, well, because if they fall into this category, they need this bit or this specific configuration. Is that what you mean?
That's one of the ways you do it. And then, obviously you've got things that are different, right? Like when I'm deploying to production, I'm going to be using, a specific set of HTTPS certs and a specific set of keys and secrets and things like that. So I have, what I would end up with are just several different inventories that would target each of those environments. And you kind of work from there.
So can you I assume you keep your runbooks in source control or something? So, especially one as complex as that. It sounds, that sounds like something that I wouldn't want to go in and touch.
Yes, of course. Yeah, we were source controlling all of the artifacts for that thing. I'll stick in a really quick plug for the commercial product here too, because I wouldn't probably hear the end of it if I didn't. But so Ansible itself is an open source product. It's free. It's a command line tool. So you go and run this stuff. That's one of the things that makes it so easy to get started with. And we can talk about the differences between Ansible and some of the other things in a second. But, Ansible itself is just a command line tool. You install it on your workstation. If you've got Python, you're good to go. And you can run playbooks and consume inventories and things like that. But that, when you get, there are certain use cases that just doesn't work very well for. If you've got a large team, if you want kind of auditing and things like that, a command line tool isn't going to provide any of that stuff. If you want a nice REST API, if you want a web interface, if you want scheduling, you can get some of those things from a command line, but you're not going to get a lot of them. So we've got a commercial product that sits on top of the open source product that provides all of those things. It's called Tower.
Okay.
So Tower will also do it'll handle a lot of the interactions with like a source control provider. It expects to get all of your Ansible content from a source control repo. So when you go configure Tower, you set all that stuff up and say, here's where all my content lives. And then you go and set up job templates and kind of make things so that you've got point and click, access the single pane of glass kind of thing for doing all of your, orchestration jobs, automation jobs and stuff from Tower. So.
And then I assume you can see analytics on compliance and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, you get a little bit of that. That's one of the things that's still kind of growing is the reporting side of things. But yeah, we get there's definitely we keep a lot of statistics and data about success of jobs and what's going on out there, and are these jobs running successfully? So yeah. It's a really general purpose toolkit. So doing things like compliance, you can certainly set up scheduled jobs to go out and enforce compliance and things like that, and make sure that those jobs are continuing to run and get email alerts if they don't, and lots of things like that.
So,
but that's
Matt. Let me ask you a little bit about the architecture and the moving pieces, and
sure.
How you get started with it with Ansible, using Ansible initially.
Okay. Well, one of the very first things I'll tell you is that Ansible is not supported on Windows. The Ansible runner control stuff is not supported on Windows. It's possible to run it under Cygwin. It's not supported and it's not recommended because Cygwin does not do. We make, especially in Ansible 2.0 and beyond, we're making really, really heavy use of fork. The fork syscall, and Cygwin's fork, Windows doesn't have fork, and Cygwin kind of implements a phony fork that has lots and lots of caution tape around it if you look at their stuff. So it just, it's basically like, yeah, this just doesn't work all the time, so be careful. And so for that reason, we have elected not to support, running Ansible under Cygwin. We're very excited about the Bash on Windows thing because it's really close to working. There's a few little things that aren't working yet. So, go out and look, search the user voice stuff on Bash for Bash on Windows about Ansible, and if you want to see Ansible be able to run under Bash on Windows, go vote for the issue that's keeping us from doing it.
Now, but you do support PowerShell remoting, yes?
Yes. So we support managing Windows machines with Ansible. But to install Ansible itself, to be able to go and do things with Ansible, the Ansible toolkit for running stuff has to be run from a Linux or Mac, a Unix-y kind of thing.
Okay,
so,
I did not realize.
Yeah, and so one of the interesting things about Ansible, and I guess let me clear up a point of confusion here. You're asking about architecture and kind of one of the really key differentiators for Ansible against some of our other competition like Chef and Puppet and Salt. We don't have agents. So those guys, if you want to go out and manage a machine, if you've got 100 machines that you want to manage, you need to go install and configure an agent on all of those machines and have them phone home. Ansible works the other way. It's push. So for Linux and for Unix-y things, pretty much everything has SSH. So we do it all over SSH. For Windows, their SSH isn't really a thing yet. So we're watching that with a lot of interest as well. But for Windows, the closest analog we've got is WinRM, which is the kind of WinRM and WSMan, which is the stuff that sits underneath PowerShell remoting. So unfortunately, it's not enabled by default, but at least it's shipped in the box. So we have a little script that you can run that you just can walk up to a Windows machine and run this little script, and it'll go and turn on all the bits that you need to be able to manage a Windows machine with Ansible.
So once it's turned on, what sort of administration can you do at that point? What sort of configuration can you do at that point?
And do you have things that are packaged that help people?
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Yeah. So we have for the Windows. So what you're looking at there, what you're talking about are modules. So those are each kind of resource that you can manage with Ansible is done with a module. So we have modules for managing the basic Windows feature stuff. So there's a Win feature module that will let you turn on and turn off various Windows features. Then we've got a series of modules for dealing with IIS. We've got modules for installing packages, dealing with files, creating directories, hacking the registry. So there's a whole bunch of Ansible modules for that. And if you're a fan of DSC, a DSC resource kind of corresponds to an Ansible module. Those are roughly analogous concepts.
Do you support DSC?
Not directly yet. We've been waiting to support DSC. The thing that was kind of blocking us from supporting it was the re-release of WMF5.
Okay.
So the WMF4 DSC stuff was a little too monolithic to be really useful from Ansible, but with the resources are much smaller and more targeted in DSC5. So we've been watching that with a lot of interest, and so we're happy that they finally went back and re-released the WMF5 for down-level systems, because that's where we can really start taking a look at it. We've had a guy in the Ansible community. There's another Windows guy that's pretty active, Trond Hindenes. He went out and wrote a little dynamic DSC wrapper that basically generates Ansible modules out of DSC resources.
Oh, no, that's cool.
Yeah. So I like a lot of the things about the way he did it, but there's a few things that I might do differently. So the plan is that at some point we will probably adopt something like that, so that you can, if you've got a DSC resource, you can use it from Ansible.
Okay.
Because I'm not a really heavy user of DSC. I mean, I've looked at that was kind of after I had moved on to Linux stuff for most of my day job. Software engineering and admin kinds of things. So I'm not a heavy user of it, but from what I understand of it, there's a push model for DSC, and that's pretty close to what Ansible does, except that we layer an entire inventory concept and a bunch of other stuff like parallelism over the top of what you can do with DSC push. My understanding of DSC push is that you can basically say, go to this machine and apply this configuration, but that's kind of the limit of what DSC push will do.
Yeah, and
with Ansible you can do that en masse. I can say, do this across these 100 machines all at once, and it'll handle that for you.
And then with DSC, once the MOF is applied to the system, then at that point it will automatically check itself on a schedule to make sure that it still complies with the settings that you specified in that MOF, and you can have it, auto-correct or drop something in the log to say, hey, I'm not in compliance anymore. Mm-hmm. So
but that's going from an agent on the box, right? There's a DSC agent that's like just kind of running those things periodically, right?
Yeah, it depends on the version of PowerShell, but it's like in PowerShell 4, it's basically a scheduled task. But I think they've changed that in PowerShell version 5 to something a little more robust than that. How does that work in the Ansible world? Once you push a configuration to a Linux box, how do you maintain that configuration, or is that something that you do?
That's not something that Ansible directly takes care of.
Okay.
The way we manage that stuff, our modules are written. There's a couple of guys that hate it when we use the word idempotent, but it's the closest thing to what it is. The modules are written to be idempotent, all the ones that we ship. So you describe the configuration you want to see, and the module will go inspect the state that's there and say, if there's something that needs to be changed, let's go ahead and change it, and then report back that we changed it. But then if you run the same module over and over and over again, it will come and say, well, okay, we're already in the right state. There's nothing to do. So,
but that's something I have to do from the central whatever. I have to push that configuration on a regular basis to make sure that the machine continues to be configured the way that I expect it to be.
Yeah, like Ansible core we don't have any kind of capability for doing that because again we basically leave no footprint on the machine.
Right, you have no agent.
The entire thing there's no agent, and like the module code itself, when we go to execute a module, we go create a temp directory, push the module over, run it, delete it. So like there's really like Ansible's kind of a zero footprint on the managed machine. Where Puppet and a lot of these other things they leave code over there, so there is something running there locally that you could use to kind of enforce things. So the way we handle that is, again, that's something that people do it themselves with cron jobs or whatever to run Ansible periodic basis, or if they're using our commercial product, then they just go and set up compliance playbooks on a schedule. So the stuff that they want to say, we always want to make sure that this is enforced. They just set the thing up to run every half hour or whatever, and it'll go out and correct things and report back if there were things that were out of compliance.
So that's just an option in Tower that you can set to say, hey, enforce this on a schedule, and it takes care of all that for you. Okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
So we have a bunch of questions that have come up in the chat room. I wanted to be sure that we hit some of these things.
Yeah, fire away.
So
I've got the window open, but I'm actually not watching it. So
well, it can be a challenge when we have any activity at all. And there have been some good questions. So let me first go to Jason. He asks, is Ansible open source or licensed? So I think you kind of answered that, but can you what delineate that a little more clearly as far as what is free and what is not free?
Sure. Yeah. So Ansible core, the thing that I work on, is 100% open source GPL v3. We actually have a couple of weird little licensing things around the module code itself, so that around licensing stuff, but they're just to make sure that we don't have like viral GPL issues. There are parts of the module code and things are written under a more permissive license than GPL v3, but in general the entire thing is GPL v3, and Ansible core is all open source. You can go to github.com/Ansible/Ansible, and that's it. And so yes, it's free. Grab it, fork it, use it, do whatever you want to do with it, within the restrictions of GPL v3. And then the commercial product that sits over the top of it that provides the web interface and the REST API and all of that stuff, that is currently closed source and commercial product. That's with being purchased by Red Hat recently, that at some point may be changing, because Red Hat generally doesn't like closed source anything. Obviously, they're kind of one of the pioneers of open source. So there's a lot of talk about how and when are we going to open source Tower? And it's there's a lot of we still haven't figured that out, because they also want to make sure that we don't lose the revenue stream from it. And if we were to just open source it without having a plan for how they're going to keep making money off of it, then that would be a problem. So that's still, there's a lot of discussion ongoing about what that's going to look like. But so currently Tower is closed source and commercial, proprietary, paid.
Can you buy service contracts? How does that work?
So currently, no. The only thing that we support is Tower. So when you buy Tower, you get support for Ansible core.
Okay,
but no,
sure.
Currently, you cannot go and buy support for just the open source Ansible core. So if you want to do that, you're kind of on your own. I know we've had customers that just buy Tower just so that they can get that support.
Sure.
But they just kind of leave it on the shelf. But if it's not something that they need, but I think that's another one of those things that's kind of an ongoing discussion with Red Hat. As to how would we want to support this going forward? Because obviously the Red Hat model, that's where they make most of their money, is on the subscription support kind of stuff. So
yeah, and I'm sure there's a lot of companies out there that aren't comfortable putting that type of software in the environment if there's no support associated with it. Yeah.
Which is exactly why some of the ones that don't really, sometimes you got people that don't really need Tower that end up buying it anyway, just so that they can get that support and have some security, some just the good feels about that.
Make sure they check the box so the director's happy, or whatever, however it works.
Yep, exactly.
So another question here is, can Ansible help with deploying the base operating system, or just the apps and packages?
We don't generally do bare metal deployment. So there's another product there's another open source project out there called Cobbler that was actually built by the guy that started Ansible, Michael T. Hahn. And so that project is all about bare metal deployment. And, it sets up a bunch of, it does a lot of the same kind of things that like WDS would do, where it sets up a DHCP server and a Pixie server and does crazy things about deploying images and whatever. There have been some people that have put together like Cobbler and Ansible integrations before to do things like that, and presumably we've had people ask about like doing a WDS, doing the same kind of thing with WDS, but so far nobody's ponied up code or paid somebody to put it together yet. So generally no. I mean we're kind of expecting that you've got at least an OS that's connected to the network and has WinRM turned on before we're going to be able to do anything with it. I mean, especially when you're talking about Windows.
Gotcha. So speaking of turning WinRM on, is there anything additional there as far as the settings that have to be made there to let Ansible in?
So there's a lot of different ways you can do it. I mean, by default, the WinRM stuff turns on pretty securely. Like it doesn't allow unencrypted stuff over HTTP, things like that. But Ansible will work with any of those configurations. But that's why we have a little script that we put in the root of our, pretty close to the root of our repo that most people use when they want to turn on WinRM on Windows. It'll take care of all the things that need to happen. It'll make sure that you've got, it'll create a self-signed cert and stuff, HTTPS listeners and kind of turn on all the stuff and get it going in the right order. Because trying to diagnose one of those things when it's not working is painful. WS-Man is it's a beast of SOAP and SOAP and XML and HTTP, and it's not fun to debug, especially as one I've been spending a lot of time working with that at the protocol level lately, trying to kind of squeeze some more performance out of things, and it's not exciting to look at. It's very 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 2003.
Do you have any idea how many or what percentage of your customers are using Ansible to do anything for Windows? I mean, I imagine that's kind of hard with something like Ansible, where you don't necessarily have the same exposure to what your customers are actually doing. You probably, in a lot of cases, you probably don't even know who's using it.
Sure, exactly. With the open source stuff, it's like, I don't know how many people cloned it off of GitHub or, installed it from pip or, rel, EPL or wherever they're getting it from. We don't have any statistics on any of that stuff. But, I guess I can speak to the commercial customers that, that were paying us for gigs when I was doing professional services. And that number has been really steadily increasing. And I think that's one of the reasons that they were really happy to have me kind of take over the Windows stuff, is just that they've got somebody that's kind of minding the store that actually wants to work on that, because it was coming up just increasingly. I don't think we're at our current, because we have to run on a Linux machine, Ansible doesn't seem to be the kind of first choice maybe for 100% Windows shop. But what we do see a lot are like people who have maybe 75% Linux and 25% Windows. They've been doing all the Linux stuff with Ansible, and they're like, this is great. Hey, can we do the Windows stuff with it too?
Sure.
And that's where, I think that's kind of our sweet spot right now. But, just from a product perspective, there's no reason at all that we can't be running in 100% Windows shop, other than the fact that you need a Linux machine around to do it. So that's why one of the reasons that I'm really excited about the Bash on Windows thing, because if we can get running underneath there, it's just that much closer, and that just knock a few more steps of junk that you have to do to be able to run this in 100% Windows shop.
Actually, that would be interesting because of what we know today. I haven't tried it yet. I've just only read about the Bash on Windows stuff, but we know it's based on Canonical's work, and I think there's going to be apt-get in there, so you'll literally be able to do like apt-get Ansible and be ready to roll, right?
Exactly. Well, that's the very, I haven't. No, I mean that's exactly what it is. I I have my fast ring machine over in the other room there, and as soon as that build landed on there, I was in there like, oh, let's see if it works. Let's see if it works. And
Nice.
unfortunately, we hit. There's something about the way that they. So if you're not familiar with the guts of that thing, it's not a VM. They did kind of a translation layer to basically translate the Linux syscalls into like this lightweight process model that they implemented. So it's not even a full Windows process. Like there aren't DLLs, there aren't anything. There's this kind of translation layer and syscall stuff and a lightweight process that's much more akin to a Linux, a Unix process. And but there's a one of the things that they didn't fully implement was around shared memory. There's something with like dev SHM that doesn't work right, and so all of the multiprocessing and lock. There's a bunch of like semaphores. There's a bunch of things that really require that just don't work without it. So I'm hoping that this is early preview. So I'm hoping that they'll go back and implement that. So that we can just work without having to modify stuff to be like, oh, okay, we're running in like, bastard Ubuntu on Windows. And so we have to do something special with this thing, detect that locks don't work and semaphores don't work and all these other things and do something else. So
right.
I'm hoping they'll fix that.
I'm going to keep rolling on because we actually we're getting a lot of questions. I'm pleasantly surprised. So thank you for everybody in the chat room. What does Ansible know, the client, I guess, what does it know about the inventory that you're managing? Does it have anything, details of the configuration of the other nodes?
It doesn't know. Well, so I guess there's two parts to that question, or there's two ways you could attack that question. If you think about things in terms of like a configuration management database or like persisted data about the configuration, the answer is nothing. We don't persist that stuff at all. So like, each module, when an Ansible module goes to enforce a particular state, it's not looking at like, well, what did I do last time I ran, or what does this database say about the state? The module goes out and inspects the state for itself and says, here's what I need to, decides what it needs to do, if anything. So from that perspective, like between runs of Ansible, there's nothing persisted. There's a couple of little things you can do around like fact caching and stuff to change that a little bit. But in general, we just inspect that state right up front every time we go, right before we go execute a particular module. But now, and as far as the inventory goes, the inventory itself, you can tell us whatever you want about your stuff. If you've got playbooks that need to that need to be driven off of particular configuration values, you can set those things in the inventory. We also have a process called fact gathering, where by default we'll, at the beginning of a playbook run, we'll go out to each one of the hosts and ask it a whole bunch of questions about like what OS are you running and what how much memory do you have, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that comes back that is dynamic about that host that can be used to kind of drive dynamic behavior. But okay, I'm not sure if that answers the question, but
I think that does. I mean, especially when you consider that basically someone asked us a short sentence, and I translated for you, and then you expand on it. So you did great.
Okay.
I thought I remembered hearing that the Bash subsystem was not going to exist on server versions of Windows, which would really hamper Ansible's ability to do configuration.
No,
in the
I've
Windows
heard that
world.
as well.
Jonathan, wait a second.
Yeah.
It doesn't hamper anything because you're not managing it from a server like that.
That's right.
Am I missing the point here?
That's right, because there's no agent.
Right. So yeah, we don't care. Like that's great. You run it means that you'd have to have a workstation. You'd have to have a workstation OS laying around to run it from. But that's most of the people that are doing Ansible, it's like you've got to either they have kind of the blessed workstation that has network outbound network access to everything, or if you've got someone that's got access to the management network or whatever, and the individual admins are just running Ansible directly on their own workstations, just using shared. They're using source control for the content, but to share the content and make sure that everybody's in sync that way. But yeah, everybody's just running it from their own workstations generally. When
wait a second, I have to go back and check myself, because how would you maintain desired state over time? Is it through repeated
That's
runs of Ansible?
Yes. So that's where you would have something like Tower, or you've got a workstation that's running that stuff from a cron job or something.
Okay.
That's not
Tower,
somebody's laptop that's going to go home every night or something.
Right. So Tower is the centralization point, but it's optional.
Right.
If you wanted to do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's just there's nothing special about Tower. It's not like Ansible ++ or anything. Like it's a whole layer that just sits right on top of the open source stuff. So the actual interface between Tower and Ansible is like Tower running the Ansible command line. It's and we have a couple of little things where it has a custom callback plugin so that we're not having to parse the standard out that's coming out of Ansible. Like it's feeding that stuff back into Tower in a more structured format. But Ansible being GPL v3 and Tower being closed source, obviously we can't have any binary hooks into that thing, or those all that stuff comes. All the viral GPL3 stuff comes and hits Tower. So Tower ends up just calling Ansible the same way you would.
Okay.
So do most people just run Tower on a server somewhere in their environment, or how does that work?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Tower is definitely a server product. I mean, that's either we offer it in a few different mechanisms. There's we've got like a Vagrant box. We've got there's like AWS images that have Tower all pre-configured. Or you can just go install it on one of the supported OSs.
I assume Windows is not one of those OSs.
No, and I even with the Bash on Windows thing, I have a really hard time thinking that it ever will be. But you never know.
So Geek Jimmy says in chat, think of Ansible like a DSC push mode.
Yeah. That's probably the closest channel.
Except you have the difference is you have to keep pushing.
Yeah.
Because there's no. Well. Yeah. I mean, if you use it to configure DSC, then DSC would then take over and make sure that the node stayed compliant. But if you're just pushing the configuration, you would need to continually push it.
And that's part of the thing where that's where my knowledge of DSC stops. It's like I know kind of the basic architecture of resources and how that part of it works, but I don't know what's going on with the agents and the persistence part on the Windows side. That's something that obviously if we end up doing first class support in Ansible for that, obviously we'll have to figure out where we draw those lines. What do we want to support and what do we not?
So have you looked at Nano Server?
I have, and unfortunately, Ansible doesn't work with it right now. I'm not sure if it's a bug or what's going on with the TP4 version of Nano Server, but I think the Chef guys ran into this too. The mechanism that we use to kind of bootstrap a module doesn't work in Nano Server, and so I'm not really sure what's going on with that. I haven't had a lot of time to spend on it, but I'm waiting anxiously for the next Nano Server, or for the next 2016 build to drop, because TP4 has been out for. Oh, they did. Oh,
yeah, I think TP5's out.
Okay,
like. I'm looking at I just Googled the news just for the sake of it. It's like ZDNet 10 hours ago. Microsoft delivers final test build.
I was going to say, I just looked at it yesterday and I didn't see anything. So, okay.
Yeah, I think I saw something from Max Trinidad did a blog post, or somebody, one of the PowerShell MVPs, I think, posted something about it. It must have been today.
Well,
all right, so basically hit reload.
I'm not panic until, but I figured I'm not going to panic about that until until the next TP comes out and make sure that it wasn't just some kind of a weird little bug. Because I know Matt. I think you guys know Matt Rock, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know he was messing around with it, I think, from Chef and Knife's perspective, and he was worried enough about it that he actually went and wrote a Ruby PSRP a PSRP client, the PowerShell Remoting Protocol. So Ansible and Chef and most of these other things, we're using the WinRS the WinRS layer of this stuff. So it's a much simpler view of the world than PowerShell Remoting Protocol. And he actually went and wrote a PSRP client because that was the only way he could get it to work with TP4. So I'm hoping not to have to do the same thing in Python, but I'm not opposed to it if that's the only way to do it. But I also kind of wonder about Nano Server, because so many of our modules just won't work on Nano Server because, there's an expectation that, for like WinFeature doesn't really make sense in Nano Server because you have to you have to build your image with the packages that you want in it. You don't add packages at runtime like that, like you do. So the commandlets that do that aren't even there on Nano Server. So I suspect that, our ability to manage Nano Server will be significantly hampered. But I haven't spent enough time with it yet to know how bad it is and if it's, it's like, is it worth supporting at all?
But there's much less management required too, which is kind of the point.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I know, obviously you can run IIS in Nano Server and, so
right.
I assume that, if you install the right packages, if you build your Nano Server image with the right packages, that all those commandlets are going to be there. So those modules would work correctly against it, assuming we can get past this, encoded. The problem is we use encoded command and it just blows up. I'm not sure why. I haven't had the time to really dig into it, but I know it's broken and I know it's not just me. So, I'm hoping that'll just magically work in TP5 and all will be well, but I guess we'll find out soon enough.
So do you think that that's going to be a priority? I mean, are you looking at Nano Server and thinking, okay, this is going to be something that's important that we'll have to take seriously? What are your thoughts so far?
I think it's definitely not something we're ignoring.
I mean, it's early, obviously.
Right. It's early, and we also have plenty of other stuff to deal with. So one of the problems that we have right now is, so in the currently shipping version of Ansible, the only ways that you can authenticate to WinRM are basic authentication or Kerberos, and that's kind of painful. Both of those are painful and have problems. Basic authentication can't be used for domain users, and Kerberos is just it's a hassle. And you have to manage the tickets yourself, so you're going out and you have to go out and run KInit for whatever user you want to do and put the password in out of band from Ansible.
That's nasty.
Yeah, it's nasty. And so in Ansible 2.1, which we're just getting ready to ship, I've been doing a lot of work with several upstream projects to get NTLM support in there, as well as like Kerberos delegation and a couple other little things. So Ansible 2.1 will have NTLM support, and so that's going to make life a whole lot easier for people that are trying to do domain management stuff. And in 2.2 or 2.3, we'll add probably CredSSP and encrypted Kerberos and a couple other things to make that easier, as well as the automatic ticket management, so that you can just give it a username and password the same way you would with NTLM or Basic or CredSSP, and it'll just take care of all the Kerberos ticket goo for you under the covers. But right now, that's not the way it works. So it's just, it's definitely a hassle, unless you're doing something basic with like, a Linux or Mac machine that you've got SSO configured and, where the machine is like joined to the AD domain and you kind of, you're logging in with your the same Windows credentials. Then it all just kind of works transparently and it just uses your Windows credentials. But if you're trying to do something where you're using a different user or whatever, doing it with Kerberos is a real pain right now.
Right. So a couple other questions, actually a few more. Tell us about what is Ansible Vault?
Sure. So Ansible Vault is just a way to store your secrets securely at rest. So for instance, if you've got, if in your inventory, you can run Ansible in several different modes. One of them around like password and secret handling. So, the basic one is just for, like my WinRM password, my AD credentials or whatever. If I can have Ansible prompt me for that every time, so I can run it with like -K, and then every time I run Ansible, it'll say, "What's your password?" And, I type it and it passes it through to WinRM. Or I can store that in my inventory. But storing a password in plain text in inventory is not a good idea. Right. So that's what Vault solves. The idea is that you can create an encrypted YAML variable file that has your AD credentials or your database passwords or your private key to your certificates or whatever kind of any kind of secrets, things that you don't want sitting in source control in plain text. You can put them in a vault file and encrypt that with a password. And then when Ansible comes across, when Ansible imports a vault file through an inventory or whatever, it will prompt you for the password to decrypt the vault. So it's not about delegation or hiding of secrets from the people who need to be able to run them. Tower provides a capability for doing that. But this is really for just storing the secrets securely at rest, so that you can upload your secrets to GitHub or to your source control provider without having to worry about if someone compromises that they're getting all your private keys and your passwords and all that stuff, because it's stored encrypted.
So then can I
then
use...
You're gonna upload an encrypted blob into your source.
Exactly.
Okay.
Can you then use those secrets in your runbooks?
Yeah. So you can use them completely transparently from playbooks. They're not
playbooks. Sorry.
Yeah, I know. It's a common thing.
I've been doing Orchestrator a lot, so everything's runbooks in my head right now.
Yeah, but you can use them transparently. So when you write your playbooks, you don't have to care if the secrets are encrypted or not. If a particular variable is encrypted or not, you write it all the same way. It's just a matter of the source of it. If you store the source of it in a vault file, then Ansible will transparently decrypt that file once it knows the password for the vault.
Okay.
So,
cool.
Yeah.
So I want to hit a term that you threw out that maybe some of our listeners are not familiar with. What is YAML?
Yes. So if you've never worked with it before, you may find YAML really frustrating. It's what was it? Yet another markup language. I think
that's exactly it.
Yeah. So what YAML is basically it's a human readable superset of JSON. It is in fact a superset of JSON. So you can, if you want to write, if you are really a glutton for punishment, if you're a masochist, you can write your Ansible playbooks in JSON and they'll just work. You'll feel right at home if you like, if you like AWS CloudFormation or any of that kind of stuff. That's just like huge wads of JSON. The Azure Resource Manager templates are all JSON. Like I'm not a fan of JSON myself as a document, a thing for writing documents that are supposed to be consumed and understood by humans. It's not a very good thing. So YAML is kind of a different encoding, if you will, I guess, of JSON that attempts to make those things more human readable. It is a significant white space, language, encoding, whatever. But that's kind of the format that Ansible uses for most things. We use YAML for all of that. So yeah, playbooks are all written in YAML, and it's a really simple format. If you go look, it's been around since like 2001. It's been around for quite a while actually. But so we're not doing anything special with it. We're using just an off-the-shelf YAML parser, and then we have our own we have Jinja 2 templating stuff mixed in there as well, so that you can, that's how our variables and things get dropped in, is, post-processing the YAML for, to do variable substitution and templating. But, I'm not sure that really answers the question. I guess it does.
Good enough.
So what do people write their modules in?
So modules can technically be written in anything. So if you're writing all the modules that we ship, all the Linux, the Unixy modules that we ship are written in Python, but there's no reason you can't write them in other things. We've had people write them in Perl and Bash and all sorts of other things. Go. We've got some experimental support for binary modules in there. So I've been thinking like, I want to write some in C# and see how that works. But so on the Windows side, the expectation right now is that modules are written in PowerShell.
Okay.
So, hence probably one of the reasons you guys wanted to talk to me. But on the Unix side though, basically as long as it understands how to get its variables from JSON on the inside, and it spits out the right shape of JSON on standard out when it's done, we don't care what it's written in. We don't ship anything but Python. But
the client, when you're running Ansible, is it going to push the modules in whatever scripting language or binaries, if you supported that, it would push that out to the client and run it?
Yep. That's exactly right. And so there, in previous versions of Ansible, there was this like nasty little substitution process where we'd go and like kind of mix together the API code, the stuff that is common to all modules, with your module code. We'd kind of squash that stuff together and like dump it into a big file and poop the whole thing over to the other machine and run it. In Ansible 2.1, we've actually ripped that mechanism, or we've kind of disabled that mechanism and turned it into something that's a little more where we're actually creating a zip file with all the Python imports and all the different bits and pieces, so that we're not munging line numbers on tracebacks and things like that. On the PowerShell side, we're still doing composition currently, though I'm looking at doing a similar thing for that, where we'll send that stuff over as PowerShell modules, like a zip file of PowerShell modules, and use them that way instead of kind of rewriting the whole thing into just a big monolithic blob of PowerShell that gets run.
Gotcha. So going back to Tower, does it provide a user interface for editing and working with playbooks, and does it kind of hold them in a repository?
It does not. It does not. It is. It expects to get its stuff from source control. So one of the very central things that you can't do anything in Tower without is a project, and a project consists of basically a pointer to source control to say, where do I get this stuff? And currently, Tower does not have any mechanism for viewing, debugging, or editing playbooks. It is purely about running. So you use your editor of choice and do whatever. There's some interesting things that are happening with plug-in strategies and stuff. We've got now a debug strategy that allows for a little bit of interactive debugging from the command line version of Ansible. So it wouldn't surprise me if at some point Tower starts to consume that, so that at least you could do kind of interactive debugging of playbooks. But I would be really surprised if we wanted to try and bite off a web-based IDE or something for Ansible, just because people kind of have their own. People are very opinionated about that kind of thing, and it's like, well, rather than doing something that is kind of lame and doesn't really fit anyone's use cases very well, use the editors that you've got, and maybe we can maybe offer some interesting stuff on the debug side. But that's still just me. If the PM for Tower is listening, like, don't shoot me. I'm not making any promises.
I've still got a few more questions. What are you guys doing in the Azure direction? Do you know anything about that? I saw that there was a module on your site. Yeah,
well, actually, there's a whole lot more now. We haven't done the doc update for it, but Ansible 2.1, myself and Chris Hausneck have been working on a whole new suite of modules for managing for doing stuff with Azure Resource Manager. So the Azure stuff that we have right now is the Azure stuff that's shipping in the current Ansible 2.0 is all service management, old API stuff. But yeah, we came up with a whole suite of modules for dealing with kind of the basic resource types in Azure Resource Manager. So virtual machines, networks, virtual networks, NICs, storage pools, storage accounts. Just there's a whole series of modules for dealing with that stuff. So the idea is that we can get to parity with AWS on that stuff, and so we'll kind of see what the uptake is on these modules and how how much more investment we're going to put into it versus will people in the community kind of step up and start building those modules. But we wanted to kind of get it kickstarted anyway to set the patterns out there and get like a common authentication layer and some kind of common code for dealing with Azure Resource Manager in Ansible, and at least get it so people can do really basic stuff. And we're actually using that ourselves to host Galaxy, which is our kind of it's a place for hosting Ansible roles, so people can upload an Ansible role that will go out and install and configure Apache or excuse me, whatever it might be. So we have an open source. There's a site out there where people can like list these things and rate them and search them and all of that and do some kind of auto download stuff inside Ansible to say like, hey, I need these four roles from Galaxy. So Galaxy is actually hosted in Azure now, and we're eating our own dog food with those modules that we wrote to push all that stuff out. So Chris and one of the other guys are going to be presenting at the Red Hat Summit in a month. I think it's about a month. About the process that we went through and what that looks like, how we're using the Azure modules to do all that stuff.
That sounds very powerful. Do you have a lot of people who are contributing to Galaxy?
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff on Galaxy, and Chris Hausneck, the other guy that was working on the Azure Resource Manager modules with me. He kind of, we did some early prototyping, and then he just kind of took him over the line, took him over the goal line while I was working on other Windows stuff for this release. But he actually also owns Galaxy. So, and there's been a lot of talk about what the future of Galaxy looks like, because right now the only thing we support in Galaxy is a role, and a role is generally used for installation and initial configuration of a thing. But it doesn't directly support modules or any of the other kind of Ansible plugins, other than just things that you can drop in that are private to a role. You can distribute those things, but yeah, there's a lot of questions about the future of Galaxy. Like, are we going to add support for all the other different kinds of plugins to Ansible? And we're kind of trying to figure that out. But yeah, it is a pretty powerful thing, and it's a pretty cool it's a pretty cool community kind of in and of itself.
What's the difference between a role and a playbook?
So a role is kind of a way to package up a series of tasks that might live in a playbook, as well as a bunch of other things. So you can package up templates and binaries and a bunch of other stuff that a particular playbook might need to do a configuration. You can package all that stuff up into a role, and then it's just kind of an information hiding capability where you can package all that stuff up and abstract it away into a role, so that instead of writing all the stuff that I need to do in line, if I need to install Apache and I've got a role for it, then I just say roles Apache, and then if there's some args that I need to pass through to it or something, then I can do that. But it's just kind of a way to package all that stuff up into a reusable unit. Okay,
so a playbook may have bunches of different roles that are maybe being pulled in from Galaxy or locally or wherever. Mm-hmm. That's exactly cool.
All right, I ran out of questions finally. I feel like it's just been nonstop, Matt, which is awesome.
Yeah, that's great.
Any last words that you want to give people who are listening to this? Most of them are going to be primary Windows people, but we've even had just in the chat room from some of our regulars who come to every live show who are saying, hey, I've got just the one Windows box that I manage, and I use PowerShell there, but otherwise we're a Linux shop, or I've got a mixed environment, like you said, that 75-25 kind of thing. But what would you say is for people as far as why Ansible? In kind of like a short and to the point way. How would you answer that?
It's simple and it's easy to get started with. It's slightly less simple and slightly less easy on Windows today, and I'm doing everything I can to make that not the case. I want to make it as easy and as simple as it can be. And so the next couple of Ansible releases, you'll see, I think, a lot of the output from that. But it is under the covers. It's PowerShell. So even if it doesn't, that's where a lot of the modules that we've gotten for managing Windows stuff have come from the community. So it's people that were like, hey, I wish I could manage, IIS app pools with Ansible. I'm going to bust up a module for it. It's pretty simple to write a little PowerShell. It's not much more work to go from just a PowerShell script for doing that to an Ansible module for doing that. So, if there's something that Ansible doesn't do that you wish it did, go write a module and submit it. If it's halfway decent, we'll probably take it. So that's where a lot of the real stuff that's been coming into Windows for managing individual resources and stuff have come from the community. So, get involved, pick up a shovel if you want to start. If Ansible doesn't do something you wish it did, it's not that hard to make it do it.
What's the release cadence like for Ansible?
So in general, it's about every 3 to 4 months we'll do kind of, we call it a major release. Our the Semver people will probably be upset with our terminology there, but so 1.8, 1.9, 2.0, 2.1, like those are about every 3 to 4 months. Okay. 2.0 was a really big, long one. It was more like 13 months or 11 months or something. It was a long one anyway, because it was basically like, rewriting huge swaths of the underpinnings of Ansible to make it kind of more scalable. But in general, so 2.1, we're sitting right about 3 or 4 months. So we're hoping to get back to that kind of 3 to 4 month release schedule. 2.1 seems to have so far. We haven't actually released it yet. We just hit RC last week, so or yesterday, Monday. So we're looking pretty good to stay on that kind of 3 to 4 month schedule.
All right, one last question, and then we go to the last question. One second, the last question. So are there any limitations to, once you are managing a Windows system using Ansible from your Linux host or Mac host or whatever, are there any limitations to the types of scripts or actions that you can call from within that WinRM session?
Yes and no. From Ansible's perspective, no. But from the Windows perspective, there are some things that just don't work from WinRM very well. So Windows Updates is a big problem. The Windows Update client doesn't like being run from a remote token. It won't let you do it. So we have a Windows Update module that actually I wrote, and we have to do nasty tricks with the task scheduler to get that to work. So the module itself is still synchronous, but under the covers, like, we're doing things with the task scheduler to escape the WinRM jail. So I mean, anybody who's used like PS Windows updates has probably run into this as well. It just doesn't work it doesn't work correctly under PowerShell remoting, and that's for the same exact reason. And we've run into a few other little things here and there, but so like sometimes there are badly behaved installers that don't like running in a headless session, with the MSIs or exe installers, things like that. But in general, if you can script it, you can do it. Ansible can do it. So it's definitely a very scripting friendly tool, and I think it's in general a lot simpler to write an Ansible module. If you go take a look at what you need to do to write an Ansible module in PowerShell, it doesn't look that different than what you would do to just write a normal PowerShell script. So
that's cool.
That's a little different than some of our competition, where you've got to be out compiling things, or you've got a large API surface area that you need to understand to be able to do something. The boilerplate to get an Ansible module running is about 3 lines of PowerShell. So it's
nice.
There's not much to it.
So one aspect that we didn't really touch on, and I'm kind of curious if you consider it important or not important, but it's the ability that Ansible has to execute ad hoc commands, totally unrelated to playbooks at all. Can you tell us really quickly how that works, and is that something you see people doing a lot? Because it's it's not declarative configuration management at all. It's kind of the opposite, right?
Right. So, well, actually, and that's kind of how Ansible started, actually. Initially was just a way to go out and, run a command on a whole bunch of machines and capture the output. The module subsystem and all this other stuff is kind of layered over the top of that. But ultimately, under the covers, we're still using that same functionality and to get things done. We're like, you don't want to know the amount of crap we have to do to do file transfers over WinRM, because WinRM doesn't have a way to do it. So we had to roll our own, and I've seen some of the ways that people do it. Even the way that the original Ansible one did it when I inherited it was horrible. Like, and it actually DOS'd the machine. If you transferred a file big enough, it eventually would stop working. But we fixed that, and I redid it, and it's orders of magnitude faster now. But still, it's doing file transfers and stuff over WinRM is nasty. But with Linux and with Windows as well. There is, especially with Linux, where it's a very command line focused environment anyway. There are some people that never really move past the ad hoc command, the ad hoc command management. It's like, if you're kind of an old school admin and you don't work in that kind of declarative way, that's okay. Sometimes it's really nice to just be able to go and run a command on 100 different machines and see what the output was, or go and make a configuration change to 100 machines. The ad hoc stuff is very powerful, and Ansible can definitely do that. Like I said, that's kind of the basis that everything else is built up on top of. So it's there's nothing wrong with that, and I would definitely encourage you to look into kind of the higher level concepts of playbooks and tasks and thinking about things declaratively and idempotently. But it's a whole lot better than logging in by hand to 100 machines. Like, let Ansible do it for you.
Yeah, I totally agreed. It's kind of like if you're going to do it, I was going to say wrong. That's actually not fair. If you're going to do it, old school, at least, do a PS exec against all of your systems at one time. And I look at Ansible as the PS exec way of approaching a problem. At least that, this ad hoc command style. Anyway.
So does it do the ad hoc commands in parallel?
Yeah. So yeah, if you've got 100 machines in your inventory and you've got there's a couple of configuration knobs that you can turn about how many things will do in parallel, but the default ones are set pretty conservatively, but they don't need to be. So yeah, if you've got an inventory of 100 machines and you want to go out and run something on all of them, like, go ahead, it'll do them all in parallel.
And you can specify a group, I assume, too.
Mm-hmm.
From your inventory?
you can just slice and dice your inventory any way you want and it's pretty powerful. That's why I was looking at, like, kind of when I was looking, and you have to be careful, obviously. You can screw things up in a big hurry too when you start doing that. But
sure.
The guy, the thing that turned out to be a hoax a week or so ago with the guy that rm-rf'd, his entire client folder or whatever using Ansible, that whole thing turned out to be a hoax. But obviously we were discussing that internally a lot. There was a lot of face palming and I can't believe that. You can shoot yourself in the foot really fast when you can do it 100 machines at a time. So. Yeah. With great power.
Well, I guess we just have the one more question then, Jonathan.
What's that?
So I will ask it of you, Matt. If you could be a superhero or have a superpower, would it be and why?
Do we count Tony Stark as a superhero?
Yes.
Okay. Then there it is. Like, just having kind of limitless resources to make the world a better place and do cool things, and have lots of toys to play with. I think that would be a great way to live my life. And has really, Robert Downey Jr. is now the only person who could ever be Iron Man and Tony Stark. Like, he's kind of spoiled for it, I think. I sure hope so. 10 years from now, I don't want to see the, I don't want to see a reboot of that. I just don't.
Well, look at Spider-Man.
That's how I feel about most.
Have there been?
That's the way comic books work, though.
Yeah.
There will be a new Iron Man eventually.
Yeah.
I don't want to think about it, Jonathan.
I'm going to be the curmudgeonly guy that's like, it's not as good as the original. Robert Downey Jr.
Well, I'm sure that's true. He owns that character.
Coming soon. When is this shit? Civil War? Is it next Friday? I think next weekend.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Coming up.
I already saw a spoiler-free review on YouTube that made it sound super exciting to me, as if it wasn't already.
You know what? I don't know about you guys. I feel as if trailers have gotten way too long, and I don't like watching them because like a 3, 4, 5 minute trailer is telling me too much about the movie.
Yeah,
and I'm literally like averting my eyes and plugging my ears and saying la 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 la.
Yeah, and sometimes they show you all the best parts of the movie.
Yeah, I know. That's the one that bugs me. You've got a comedy if it's an Adam Sandler movie or something, like they showed you, the preview showed you all the best bits. Like you're just the rest of it's just filler. The trailer had the 3 minutes of best material in the movie.
And I know somebody got paid really, really good to do the editing, to produce, to take the, probably 4 or if not 100 hours of footage and boil it down to, those 3 minutes. But yeah, if that's the part that, they're basically showing me the only good parts of the movie, they fooled me,
Yep.
I don't want that. Alrighty. Well, thank you very much, Matt, for coming in, hanging out with us. This has been very instructive. I learned a lot about Ansible, and I hope that everyone else listening did as well.
Well, my pleasure. Go give it a try. Like and get involved in the community. Tell us what it needs. I'm always I'm all ears. We all are.
All right, and now we are talking about trailers in the chat room, apparently, which is fine with me. So what comes next after Civil War? As far as good movies coming up, because it's blockbuster movies.
Doctor Strange is also this year.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
That one looks really cool. I'm looking forward to that one. Is Galaxy
and the
Guardians 2,
Rogue One is this year too, December.
Oh yeah, I'm waiting for that one.
And then Apocalypse, X-Men Apocalypse.
I hope that's good.
It's gonna be a busy year. Alrighty, cool. Well, I am gonna go ahead and sign off. Thank you, everybody.
Good night, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, especially for all the questions. I was shocked at how much activity for a product that doesn't support Windows.
You fooled everybody, and you made it work, and it was super interesting. So we appreciate that.
Yeah, well, it was good times. So good luck with everything, and I'll be be watching you guys.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Take care.